G'day folks, my name is Rob. Welcome back to another F1 Fantasy video. Today I want to take a look at a few tips and strategies worth considering ahead of the first race of the F1 season next weekend. If you like the video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel. As many of you know, there was a big announcement from F1 during the week around some of the new rules, boosters and other things that are coming to F1 Fantasy this season. I'm really excited. I think the game really needed a shake-up, and I think that's exactly what we've got. So this video is going to cover a lot about what's been revealed and some of the tips and strategies I'm thinking about heading into the first race next weekend. The first thing I want to cover at the moment is picking the best team. I know at this point we don't have prices yet for any of the drivers and constructors, but we should find out about that as soon as preseason testing concludes. So I do caveat that some of what I say is contingent on what these assets are priced at, but notwithstanding, I think in general terms, a lot of what I do refer to is kind of what my thoughts are at the moment. So yeah, let's take a look. So the first thing I've got here is for picking the best team is definitely, as was the case last season, to pick at least one constructor from the big three teams. One of the new rules that's been introduced this season is that now we will have two constructors to choose from. It's up in the air at the moment whether it is two big three constructors or a big three constructor and a budget constructor. Perhaps the reason why the budget constructor option will be considered by a number of people is because we just didn't have that option last year, and I assume the way pricing has been structured this season will incentivize people to go in that direction instead. The reason why obviously Red Bull, Mercedes or Ferrari needs to be top of your shopping list is because of the fact that more often than not, they will have both drivers certainly in the top 10, if not in the podium places. So to maximize your points on any given weekend, the chances of that happening is fairly high. At the moment, I'm still leaning towards Red Bull. I know pricing is very much dependent on that, but this video is filmed after the first day of preseason testing and Max looks very strong out of the blocks. So I've got my eye on them. Mercedes and Ferrari also both featuring in the top 10 on day one of testing. So again, alternative options if you want to consider them, but I think the decision in some capacity will come down to what they are priced at. As for Max Verstappen himself, another thing that's been introduced is the DRS boost, and that it applies to any driver now, and not just under the $20 million cap we had last season. And for Verstappen, he is far and away the best driver, not just in fantasy, but in F1, as we all know after his performances the last couple of seasons. Given the fact that there isn't a cap on the DRS boost, or previously known as Turbo Driver last season, I think Max has to be, along with Red Bull, top of your list. He's going to be in the mix for winning the race. Last season he won, I think, or sorry, from a fantasy perspective, scored the highest race points 11 times out of the 22 races. So if you're getting a 50% top scoring weekend from one driver, that's sensational output. Another thing that F1 mentioned in their announcement is that the DRS boost, I believe, reverts to whatever driver has your highest score in your team for that week. So given Verstappen, had the highest score of all drivers on 50% of the weekends last season, it's fairly good odds that he'll be delivering something similar for this upcoming season. So he is top of my shopping list from a driver's point of view, and unless there's any reason to suggest to go against the grain, I think I'd much rather take that approach early on and then adjust accordingly. Another point I've got here is assuming that points for beating teammates remain heading into 2023, and we've heard nothing from F1 on the point scoring metrics to suggest that there will be any changes. I will be looking at drivers that are the clear standout options in their team. Albon and Lando Norris both come to mind for me, not just because they have rookie teammates this season, but also proved last season that they were a cut above their teammate. And Albon had a really strong first day of preseason testing today. He was certainly in the top 10 and just seems to look really at home in that Williams. It seemed to be the case last season as well. So Depending on where he comes in, he should be at the lower end of the pricing scale. I definitely think he's a strong candidate, a budget enabler of sorts to have in your team for that first week. As for Lando Norris, also had a really good first day of preseason testing. He's got Piastri. I think the battle between Piastri and Norris will be slightly closer than that of Albon and Logan Sargent, but I still think Norris, given he's been around the McLaren for a number of years now, and in my opinion is probably the best driver on the grid outside of the big three, should be another really good option, and probably will be priced the highest of all drivers outside of those from Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari. So keep an eye on him. I still like the look of Lando, and if it comes between deciding him and say Carlos Sainz, for example, I think Norris is going to edge that for me. So you keep an eye on what the point scoring metrics are for beating teammates, but something to monitor heading into the first race of the season. The next thing I want to take a look at are the power-ups. This is probably the biggest change to the game this season, and I think is a really good thing for the game. There's an extra element of strategy for a number of these new power-ups. I think they were previously referred to as chips, and I think gives us optionality when deciding to deploy those. I think a number of them will probably come into effect around sprint race weekends, and I'll get into that in a minute. But up from only a couple of chips we had last season to now 6, really gives us a variety as to when we want to use them and how we want to use them. So the newest, I'll go through the first 3 new ones and then take a look at the 3 existing ones that have carried over from last season. Limitless, definitely the most exciting and I think the most powerful of the 3 new chips to the game this season. That allows you to change your entire team with an unlimited budget for 1 week only. So I think, given the sprint race, assuming that the points metrics are similar to how they were last season, they allow for a much higher point ceiling than any standard race weekend. As a result of that, I think you'd really want to be loading up on your Ferraris, your Mercedes, your Red Bull assets for a sprint race. As far as the composition of that is concerned, I can't really say with any certainty, but I would hazard a guess I'll be going all in on 3 Red Bull and at least 2 of Ferrari and 2 Mercedes. For Final Fix, this is something that you're allowed to use between qualifying and race. So you're allowed to change one driver in that period of time. And I think the best time to use that is if a premium driver qualifies poorly. A good example of that from last season was Lewis Hamilton in Saudi Arabia. I don't think he made it out of P1. And if you had him in your team going into the race, you wouldn't be stoked about it. Let's put it that way. So that would be a great example of an instance where you utilize Final Fix. You move out Lewis Hamilton for someone around that same price. Sergio Perez, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, one of those ones that have qualified quite strongly in good position to do well on the Sunday. So I think that's really useful to have. Again, I'm not going to jump at using this as is the case with probably any of the 3 new chips immediately, but I think it is one that you can use and gives us a bit more flexibility between qualifying and race day as to how you want to deploy that booster or that power up, should I say. This third one, I'm still not entirely clear exactly how we can use it. It wasn't specific in the announcement from F1, and I think that can extend to the majority of the announcement that was published on F1's webpage. I'll put that in the description. How I interpreted it was that the team or an asset cannot score negative points that weekend. I wasn't sure if we can apply that retrospectively or if we have to guess the race to use it in. I would hazard a guess it's the former, because otherwise it just seems like a pointless chip if you're having to guess when to use negative points. I think maybe a good example of that would be if it's wet weather and you're concerned your driver might spin out or crash, whatever it might be. But I think that would just really not make a lot of sense if we're having to guess when to use that and guess when a driver isn't going to perform well. So I think if we're allowed to use it post race, it would be if one of your premium drivers, I would say, scores negative, or sorry, any driver for that matter scores negative, but on like a much, I guess, a very low score. So a -10. Again, not sure how the scoring metrics will be for DNS, but if it's anything like seasons gone where it's a -10 for not finishing the race, then that would probably be a good instance to use that power up. The DRS boost, which was called the turbo driver last year, as I said before, there's no price cap on who it can be used on. I think Max is the standout option for that. So given it should be available to use every week and reverts to your highest driver, as I said, Max is definitely the standout candidate for me. The extra DRS boost, formerly known as the Mega Driver, that was most commonly used when a driver was on a streak or at a sprint race. I think I used mine when Max was on a streak last year because streaks are not in the game this season. Sprint races are the most logical time to use the extra DRS boost. And then as for the wildcard, probably doesn't need much explanation as to how it's used. And there isn't really an indication as to how many changes we can use on this wildcard. If it's the same as last season, there's up to 12 changes. But in other games, you can use a wildcard and make as many changes as you want to do. So I would say unless you want to make wholesale changes to your team, or need to make more than 4 changes in a week. And the reason I say 4 is because we can carry forward 1 sub from the previous week. So to have, as a result of that, because we get 2 subs every week, you could have up to 3 subs. And if you're taking more than 3 or maybe 1 penalty sub per race, which would result in a -4, then I'd say, yeah, if you're making 4 or 5 changes a week, then I would suggest the wildcard. But given there's still a little bit of uncertainty around scoring, how drivers and constructors are going to perform early on with the scoring and in this new F1 fantasy landscape, it might be useful to deploy that wildcard in that 2nd, 3rd or 4th week. Again, we're also not sure when prices will change, if we're able to make those trades to our team before the prices change, or if we are locked out until the prices go up and down. So I wouldn't be surprised if it gets to week 3 or week 4 and a few of us are scrambling with teams, we're not sure who we want in our teams, then the wild card could come in handy then. So let's see how that goes. But all in all, I think these power-ups, as I've said, are really going to be great for the game and add a bit more variety to how we play and strategize week in, week out. As far as maximizing your points are concerned, as I touched on previously, you've got to utilize those power-ups effectively. I think over the course of the season we'll understand the best opportunities to use those power-ups, but I think they do allow you to bridge a gap between your rivals and move further ahead. So just make sure that you're thinking about when you want to use them and how you want to use them. As I think I touched on before, there is the option, there are 2 constructors that every team will need to have, and one of the other adjustments to the game this season is that the fastest lap points are now on offer for constructors as well as drivers, I believe. So if you're wanting to cover fastest lap points for the constructor, it might be wise to go with 2 premium constructors. So 2 being 2 of Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull. It's only, I believe, 5 points for the fastest lap, but if you want to bank those, then it might be smart to go Max Verstappen, 2 premium constructors, and then just build the rest of your team out like that. So yeah, I definitely think that's an option I'll be considering, but again, it will come down to what the constructors are priced at. Another thing I've got here is to choose the best drivers available based on form reliability in the various price brackets. What I mean by that is, when we're looking at premium drivers, I think Max will be in a class of his own. But then, unless there's any particular change or reason that dictates significant variance between some of the other price brackets, I would expect Russell, Hamilton, Leclerc, Perez all to come in pretty close to one another. So I guess you want to decide if you're kind of going for drivers in those price brackets who the best ones are. Same again applies to budget and mid-price. But I guess there are other factors that come into deciding who to choose from in those price brackets. For instance, being a stronger teammate. I'll go into that in a minute. Whether we get points for beating teammates, and in say Mercedes' case, if Russell and Hamilton are priced similar, but it's clear from early on that Hamilton is the stronger of the two, then he's probably the option to go for. But then form and reliability, the reliability more of the car itself, and we probably won't have a good idea of that until a few races have been run. But form, I know it is F1 and it is pretty unpredictable, particularly with DNFs, how they can just pop up out of nowhere. But I do think form is a great indication of how drivers and constructors will score, and I definitely saw a lot of that last year, where you'd see even the mid-price drivers string together 2, 3, 4 strong performances in a row, and just monitoring that, keeping tabs on how they're going against their teammate with the car at the different circuits does make a huge difference. So just something to consider there. As far as the mid-price drivers are concerned, and yes, we don't have the prices, that is pretty open, but I think from a budget perspective, as I've touched on, Alex Albon, for me, assuming he's not priced too high but not too low, is probably the standout candidate for me in that price bracket. And then this last point here, are points for beating teammates going to remain in the game? If so, I think that's great. I think it really adds another element of scoring to the game, so I cross my fingers and hope that stays. As I touched on before, Alex Albon, Lando Norris are two that stand out to me as clearly alpha teammates in their respective teams. So definitely keep an eye on those drivers that are going to outperform their teammate in qualifying and on race day, week in, week out, because that's an extra 2 or 3 points or 5 points if the scoring stays the same in your pocket, and that can make the difference between an okay week and a good week. So just a few things to consider, but that's all. Not too long of a video, but just wanted to get some thoughts down. If you like it, as I said, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'll be pushing out a few more videos before the first race next week, and definitely a couple more as soon as the game goes live on Monday. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, have a great weekend, and I'll see you all very soon.